Hello and welcome to Gaston Spotlight. I'm your host, Tennyson Trent. My guest today is an English instructor here at Gaston College, Miss Beth McCall. How are you today, Miss McCall?
I'm very well, and thank you, Tennyson, for having me on your show.
Well, I'm very glad to have you. It's a very interesting topic. So, you created this book club for professional development to help facilitate conversations about important topics like race, for example. So I just want to know, what led you to create this type of book club?
Well, first let me say that, Gaston College is committed to promoting the idea of learning for life. And that is something that we actually teach our students.
Right.
It's going to be part of your career and your life forever, is constant upgrades. And so we actually live by that ourselves, and we have certain hours that we have to put into professional development every year. And then you add the fact that the state of North Carolina defines our classes. And so about 5 years ago, as a developmental instructor, the state of North Carolina just completely upended what we had been doing for decades and said, okay, we're going to do it this new way. And then 18 months later, they said, no, that's not working. We're going to do it this way. And they completely redefined it. And in one of those redefinitions of what it meant to be a developmental English instructor, the state said, from this point forward, you will teach, in these particular classes, you will teach not only English, but you'll teach reading. Remember, I don't have a master's degree in reading. Right. And not only will you teach reading, but you will also teach growth mindset. Well, that was an absolutely new term to me, and I felt like, is this when I should retire? I'm serious. I thought about, maybe this is my time to step out. And it's like, no, wait, I've got kids to put through college. And so at that point I said, all right, I'm going to do what I tell my students to do. If you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, do some research. And so I got the book, Carol Dweck's Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, because this is where the term growth mindset comes from. About 30 years of research at Stanford in California. And I started reading it, and I thought, this is amazing stuff. But there were other teachers in my department who were also going to be teaching it. And I said, why don't we get together and discuss this book as a group so that we can learn about it together? And I said, and while we're at it, why don't we invite some of the psychology instructors, because this is their information as well. And so kind of organically, the first group grew out of that. And you had people, we'd work all week, and every second week we would sit down and discuss several chapters together. And it was like this free exchange of ideas, because it wasn't like there was an authority. None of us knew what we were doing. Right. So we're talking about it, and we're saying, well, what does this mean for our students? And we're sharing ideas. And it was so kind of a release of pressure and fear that we would not be able to accomplish what the state wanted us to. We were so noisy that instructors and staff from down the hall would be walking by going, what's going on in there? And we were just having a great time. And then we added snacks, and it became a real event. But from that, when we ended, the question was, is this where we want to stop? This has been so great. And so at that point, we added another book that was really being discussed in academic circles, called Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance. And I've got to tell you that right in the middle of this book club, the pandemic hit.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the question was, should we, move it online? We were in survival mode, and we took a hard hit at that point and kind of finished that up and put book clubs aside for just a little bit while we got our feet under us. But once we, as a group, realized that we are going to be able to survive teaching online. And I've got to tell you that I'm the least techie person. All my friends know this about me. I mean, I have to hand my phone to people and say, teach me how to whatever. But my friends circled around me, and they said, we will tell you what you need to know to survive the pandemic. And they taught me things I absolutely had to know. My gift back to them was to keep asking questions like, should we have another book club? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So at that point, we picked up a book I highly recommend called The Years That Matter Most, How College Makes or Breaks Us, by Paul Tough, in which he pulls back some of the some of the curtains and proves that everything is not equal in higher education. Some people get more chances than others get. And as educators, it was incredibly important for us to see the statistics. And across the United States, a lot of the examples in this book are pulled from real people in North Carolina. One of my favorite people in this book was a community college student who transferred then to Clemson, and she was from up in the Hickory area, so real people. And so this book kind of lit the fire in us to make sure that we are giving all of our students, no matter what their backgrounds, whether they're first gen, no matter their age, their race, their gender, that everybody is getting an equal chance at success in our classes. And let me say right now that those book clubs were about a dozen people. It's a small group kind of setting, and so not everybody can always attend, so we're talking about 8 to 12 people. But my heart's desire from the moment that we got maybe to the second book was to open this up to the whole campus, to any employee at Gaston College. So let me say that between the third book that we did and the book we're doing now, of course, you know, back in summer 2020, not only were we being hit by the pandemic, but most of the nation watched George Floyd be murdered on camera. And so there was this upswell, something that had been in our minds all along, but this huge upswell of concern that as educators, we need to be doing everything in our power to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Gaston College has a statement whereby Gaston College goes public with that is one of our institutional goals. And so it seemed fitting that our next book would be Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations About Race. But really, what good does it do if only a dozen people out of hundreds, internalize the messages in this book and the information, the statistics, and so forth? So, with the backing of my dean, Tanya Broom, who had been behind the book clubs all along and putting her money where her mouth was, and using funding through the division so that people didn't have to buy books out of pocket. With her encouragement, I reached out to the deans in the other divisions, asked them if they would be interested in offering not in a mandatory way, but in a voluntary way, anybody in their divisions that would be interested in participating. And so as of this fall, we launched 4 book clubs in different parts of campus with different leaders, different volunteers. And so our goal was to have at least 4 cohorts, and we do. And some of them are groups that, for instance, we didn't have, we had a number of folks in the science department. We did not put all those folks in one group. We had a number of folks from the English department. We did not put all of them in one group because that instantly skews the perspective. So we very carefully tried to balance groups so that there's a variety of interest represented and perspectives and experiences. And so right now we are in the middle. We meet every second week for an hour or hour and a half via Zoom, and we have particular passages that we've read, and then we just throw out questions. Our groups are racially mixed. There's various ages, various experience levels, and so far the feedback has been fabulous. And I'm hopeful that, the thing about reading a great book is that you don't necessarily put it away never to return. And so at least 2 of these books need to be on everybody's reading list, I believe, not just instructors. Right. And is it okay for me to go somewhere with this right now, besides the academic?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we talked about the message. I mean, as we're filming this, the question is, this is great for instructors, but what's the application for college students? And we did talk about you need to embrace the idea of learning for life. You're going to be training for the rest of your career. And I say that as somebody who's been in the business, my business, for 32 years, and I hope to be in the business for at least 10 more, but possibly the next 30. But we won't get into all that. Let's talk about the implications of book clubs for just personal interest. I work with a lot of students who they would say, I'm not a big reader, but I like fantasy. Or I'm not a big reader, but I like graphic novels. Well, or anime. I get a lot of papers about anime, and I love that because they've educated me so much. But what I would like to suggest is that if you have a particular interest, there are others like you. And if you have a particular graphic novel that you absolutely love, get a group of 5, 6 to 12 people. If you go over that, it gets a little unmanageable. But somewhere between 5 and 12, and just say, hey, do you guys want to read this together and talk about it? Add snacks. Okay, the magic happens.
Right.
Okay.
Wow, that's great. And so something I was kind of thinking about with all this is, taking those books home and reading them on your own and having that personal time to explore these ideas, because we see a lot, or at least I've seen a lot, people are sort of unwilling to have these conversations about, these important topics. But being able to take a book home, read it, explore those ideas on your own, and then having a place where you're comfortable to go and have that public discussion seems like it would be a really great way to explore all this.
It's absolutely excellent, and especially when you have a starting point of some discussion questions. And for this particular book, I created discussion questions, and with the idea that these are just starting point. Wherever our conversation goes, that's where we're going to go. Okay? But having some questions, especially if you can send them out in advance and say, this is what we're going to be discussing. As you read, think about these things. And then that kind of gives enough structure that it doesn't just turn into a discussion of people saying, yeah, what really bugs me, and then chasing a topic that's kind of away from the goal. But I will say that book clubs have their built-in things that you have to be aware of. If it's going to be absolutely optimal, you have to know that some people don't like to talk at all. They want to be in the book club, they want to read, but they are hesitant to share their thoughts for many reasons. They may think, I'm not sure that I have anything of value to add, or Tennyson says it better, I'll let him say it. Or it may be that the topic is too frightening for them, and they're afraid to offend someone. If they say this is what I believe, they're afraid that it may break a relationship. So as a facilitator, and I won't even use the word leader, but as a facilitator of a book club, if you go in knowing that some people do not like to talk and some people like to talk too much, all right, then you can put safeguards in place for that. For instance, one thing that we've done is we put the questions in the chat, and we say if you don't feel comfortable, or if something strikes you while somebody else is talking, feel free to respond in the chat. And then one person kind of monitors the chat while the other person kind of guides the discussion. So that gives folks who are hesitant about speaking out loud their voice. And then you've got the other end, and I will self-identify as landing on this end of the spectrum, is you get to talking and it's like it just goes. But as the facilitator, you have the power and really the right to protect the integrity of the conversation, and say so that you can say, thank you so much for sharing that. Hey, I think that Jeff has something he wants to add. Jump in, Jeff. And you can just kind of help people stay on track.
Well, that's great. And talking about that, is there, a lot of times, like you're talking about, there can be pitfalls, though, with letting it go off the rails. What are some ways to, I know you said, trying to get people in more, but what are those things you want to avoid, and how do you avoid them?
Well, sometimes we call it chasing rabbits. Sometimes those topics are incredibly important, but they're too broad for the scope of that conversation. And when that happens, what I just say is, we're going to need some data on that before we can adequately respond to it. Who wants to look that up and be ready to talk about it when we get back together? You see, that's a teaching kind of skill popping in there. So you don't deny the conversation, but it's legitimate to say we can't talk about it now.
Right.
We don't have either time, so let's revisit this next time, or we don't have enough information to talk about it successfully. So let's gather some data and be ready to talk about it. So that's one way. And then, when, let's say that somebody, and this doesn't really happen, but I can see that it could, let's say somebody has an axe to grind. They're angry with somebody who snubbed them 6 years ago. And this is the context in which they can bring that back out. All right, so at that point, you're going to wait till they take a breath. And when they're breathing, you jump in and you say, I can tell that it's really frustrating for you. We do have a couple more questions that we really need to get through. So let's jump back on that, and then I would follow up with that person personally later. Say, I'm really sorry that happened to you, and I know that you're stressed. I know that still stresses you out, and I hope you find a way to. And just having somebody say, what you're feeling is legitimate. I get that. You know, it's a big deal.
That's good. And well, that's all the time that we have for today. I know it was so much great information, and I just want to give you a sincere thank you for sharing all that with us. It's so interesting. It's something I might look into myself. That sounds great. So once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And so that was Miss McCall. She started off this whole book club thing that is absolutely wonderful. I've been your host, Tennyson Trent, and this has been Gaston Spotlight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.